There should never be anything published anywhere that hasn't been heavily ideated and critiqued by a human. I think the idea of letting AI or any tool in general run the show 100% is incredibly flawed. We're on this early stage with agents, which is, an incredibly interesting and deep topic. The idea of AI agents. It's some of the most innovative tech that we've had since the birth of the internet. But I still think that it's going to be mostly used incorrectly in the beginning. I think there's going to be a lot of people that are phoning in their job, collecting the paycheck, and then letting an AI agent do the work. And what companies, people, brands, et cetera, are going to continue to experience is further watering down of the internet as a whole, right? Like everything that we engage with digitally is getting more and more watered down as these tools become more and more accessible and prevalent.
This is Social Pulse Podcast Agency Edition, your go-to guide to solving your biggest marketing agency challenges authentically. I'm your host, Mike Alton, and each episode is an honest and frank look at what agencies go through, from turning clients to tackling tech and ideas that you can apply to your own business. And now, the rest of today's episode.
Welcome back to Social Pulse Podcast Agency Edition, where each and every week we're talking to marketing agencies like you going through many of the same struggles you're going through and sharing their stories. Subscribe to find in each episode the inspiration, the motivation, and the perspiration that go into growing and scaling agencies like yours. I'm wondering, does your agency feel like it's held together with duct tape and a press? Every new client brings both excitement and dread as you wonder how your team will manage yet another account. Your processes, if you can call them that, are stretched thin, and what worked for 10 clients is crumbling under the weight of 20, 30, or more. The constant juggling act leaves you exhausted, your team stressed, and your growth potential limited. Well, today's guest knows exactly how to transform that chaos into a well-oiled machine. Haydn Fleming, CMO of 2 Point Agency and managing partner of their Dallas branch, has built systems that successfully manage hundreds of client programs simultaneously. As someone who's plugged into countless marketing programs at any given time, Haydn brings practical, proven strategies for creating sustainable systems that scale. And he's here to show how you can build an agency machine that runs smoothly, whether you're handling 10 clients or 100. Hey, Haydn, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. That was a great intro.
Well, like I tell folks very transparently, Claude helps me write all of these intros, but you're the one who did the hard work to earn those accolades. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing some of that experience with us.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. So before we dive into solutions, can you paint a picture of what it looks like when an agency's processes kind of start to break down under the kind of growth we were just suggesting?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much terrible in every meaning of the word. You're experiencing problems with your team, your staff. You're looking at being spread thin. Your clients are experiencing issues, maybe for the first time. Clients that you've previously had great relationships with are starting to feel like you're not the same anymore. Quality of output dips, frequency, speed of output dips. Your communication structures are broken. It becomes harder to track expenses, right? You get a lot of people involved or a lot of processes going on. More time is having to be spent on internal communication, which at the end of the day is just more expense building up on what you were previously doing. Maybe you're having to hand responsibilities off to people that don't have the proper training that they need. And so that then causes more lack of quality, more issues to appear. And realistically over time, I mean, it pretty much always goes the same way. You either figure it out and you get things back on track, or you end up right back where you started, and your whole attempt at trying to scale and all that work that you did to grow goes right back to the bottom, and you're right back where you started.
I suspect a lot of folks listening might have been cringing a little bit as they heard you describe problems that they're probably going through right now. I can recall being told by clients, it's just, you've gotten too big. And what they're really saying is they're not getting the same kind of attention that they might have used to, because myself or other agencies might be thinking, we're not too big at all. We want to be even bigger. But obviously, they're not giving the same kind of handholding and care and attention that those customers deserve. In your case, what were some of the early signs in your journey that kind of made you realize that you needed to build some better systems?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's some of, and a little bit of all of those things I just mentioned, right? So, you get to a point where you experience clients commenting on different experiences, right? Maybe an experience that used to be good is now not as good as it used to be, or an experience that used to be smooth or fast or quality used to be high. They're feeling like it's not the same thing that they're getting anymore. Or also just conversations internally, right? You're going to have your staff raising red flags and saying, "Hey, I don't have time to do that," or "I don't know how we're going to get that done," or that person's already busy; they can't get this done this week, right? And so you see, you promise being made and then not being fulfilled, which is like the golden sin in this round of business, right? When you make a promise, you have to meet that, and so you see those signs really early. But it's also one of those things that, like, if you're seeing the sign, you're probably already a little too late. And so, we've had experiences in the past. I've personally had experiences in the past, right? Of, committing, committing, committing. And if you're earlier on in your agency career, it's easy to say, like, yes, we can do that. Yes, we could do that. Yes, we could do that. And then everything's going great. And that's good for you. It's good to say yes to a lot of things. But eventually, you hit that wall and suddenly you're realizing, like, you can't do everything, or at least you can't in your current capacity, and so you have to sort of step back, reanalyze, and figure out, how do we actually build something that can, so I can keep saying yes. And that very quickly becomes less about you and more about the people and systems that you've built around you. And I think it's a totally different type of skill. It's a totally different part of, like, building a business, right? Because I think in the early stages of an agency, it's so founder led. It's very often that there's only like one or two core people that do 90% of the work. And then everybody else is like, there's a lot of hiring VAs and hiring freelancers and doing things like that. And when you get to the point where you no longer can be responsible for 90% and you realize you have to actually start relying on a team and systems and tools and all of this stuff to basically act as you, it requires a totally different type of leadership and a totally different set of capabilities that a lot of agency owners and operators don't have when they get there the first time. And so it's hard, and you got to learn the hard way. Sometimes you have to get punched in the face to know what getting punched in the face feels like and how to avoid it in the future.
Man, I am nodding my head so vigorously right now because I that was literally me. 2 decades ago, I had a web development agency, and it folded because I was saying yes to everything I could to try to bring in revenue, but it was too much, and then I get overwhelmed with work, and then I had to say no to projects or whatever, or I couldn't spend time marketing, and so it was this constant battle of trying to scrape to bring in more projects and then having too much. And yeah, that didn't work. Just like you said. And I had to learn the hard way how that needed to be done correctly. So if an agency owner now is in those kinds of shoes that I was in a couple decades ago, they're feeling that overwhelm, what do you think would be the first step that they should take to start building a true agency machine?
Yeah, I mean, I think, probably the most important thing, and the and not flashy, not pretty answer is, you have to sort of embrace that it's hard and that it's going to suck and it's probably going to be really chaotic, and it's going to be a period of your life, really, not just your career or your job, but it's to be a period of your life, that things are going to be a little harder. And it's hard because that's what doing good, impressive, difficult things is. If it was really easy, everybody would do it. Um, and so I think there has to be a part of you that knows that it's going to be hard and is okay with that. If you go in looking for like a quick, easy way, or like, here's a proven 15-step framework to yada yada, you're going into it with the wrong mindset, and you're a lot more likely to fail because you're not really you're not internally prepared for how difficult it really is. I think you have to go into it knowing that you're going to be going through a very difficult, tight tunnel, but there is a light at the end, um, and you have to be prepared to sort of build in that environment. You have to be prepared to work in that environment. And it might be 6 months, it might be a year, it might be 2 years, right? But at the end of the day, if you aren't going into it with that mindset, I think you're going to be putting a handicap on yourself that's going to make it that much harder for you to achieve what you're really trying to work towards. That's the whole point.
I think that's fantastic advice because there's two levels to that, right? There's the hard truth that this is going to be hard work and it's going to take time. But to your point, there is light at the end of the tunnel. So many agencies like yours have found the right processes to put in place so that they're able to scale their agency. So there's hope. So
Hmm.
what would some of those like essential components be for an agency that wanted to actually scale efficiently and successfully?
Yeah, so I think one of the first like big things that helped me, there's this book the author's eluding me, but it's really well known when it comes to leadership. It's called Who Not How. In it, I heard about this for the first time actually prior to my work in marketing. I was a leadership in a sales organization, and I heard about this Who Not How concept, which basically, for those who haven't heard it, it's essentially instead of thinking about how do I solve this problem or how do I deliver this result or how do I get myself out of this negative situation I'm in, it pushes you to think rather than who, as in who can I hire or who can I work with or who can I partner with that is going to be able to do this maybe even better than I am, right? And a lot of what this concept alludes to is like the ability to save your own time and effort, because if you can use the labor of others, if you can properly employ people and properly delegate and give the work to people who arguably are better than you at the thing that you need done, then the how doesn't need to take up all of your mental energy and your day and your week or your personal expense, etc. By delegating out, by being able to think with a who mindset instead of a how mindset, you're able to scale a lot faster. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times, you know, where as a agency leader myself, I am wall to wall every day, all day. I'm working with clients, I'm working with team, I'm building system. We're doing all of this stuff. For somebody to come in and say, "Hey, we have this new idea, this new initiative that we want to execute." Depending on its complexity, that could literally be a month, 2 months, 3 months of for me to properly execute. When I could hire somebody who could do it in 2 days because they already know how to do it, have been there, done that. They can dedicate their every waking hour and every waking minute to it. And so realistically, like if you think about that over a long enough time horizon, you're able to move significantly faster and achieve significantly more by leveraging people around you rather than building it yourself. So that is probably one of the most important components is how do you employ people, know who the right people are, right? Because you can't just employ anybody; has to be the right person. And then how do you put them in a position where you show that they have your trust, they have freedom, they have the ability to fail, they have the ability to experiment, try new things, to do things their own way, and like let them really um, go at something. When you give people that kind of freedom, especially if it's their area of expertise or their area of passion, you're going to get 10 times farther, 100 times faster, working in that sort of mentality. um, and sort of a second to that, sort of in collaboration with that idea is also tech, right? And especially with AI and where everything is today and where it's going to be next year and the year after that. Tech, and really it already has been for the last 2 decades, but going beyond that, tech is getting more and more ingrained in our lives, both work wise and personal, every day, every month, every year. And so knowing when something is a human task rather than a tech task is also a very important skill set, because there are a lot of things that you can solve with a handful of clicks on a button today that you needed a 20-hour work week on just a year ago or 2 years ago, or let alone 5, 10 years ago. So there's also a balance between how do you understand the difference between where employing humans, and again the right humans who have passion, who have capability, who have expertise to do these sorts of things, and then also when to employ tech, and both for yourselves but also for those people, right? Because I think if there's a ripple effect, tech is exponentially more valuable the larger team you have, because you can spread that value across more and more individual projects, time, mental capacities, capabilities, etc. So the one way that, you know, one team member is going to use a tech platform might be more or less valuable than another who might get 10 times the value or zero the value out of it, right? But when you extrapolate it over an entire team, you can suddenly get, 5 human 40-hour work weeks worth of value in a day because you're getting all this value spread throughout your entire staff. So, knowing the balance between the who, not how mindset, and then also the sort of tech minded aspect of how do we then like enable the who to be capable. And it's not an easy thing to get right, and a lot of it is gut feel. But you can build processes for this. There's like some very simple frameworks that I use, or I guess rules that I would use to make sure that I'm kind of doing this the right way. So most of the time, when it comes to hiring, I'll have like a couple of simple rules. Like one, everybody's going to get at minimum two rounds of interviewing with different people. So you never just like meet somebody by yourself and make a decision. And even if you're a one person agency, like ask your wife or girlfriend, or ask your brother or your sister or your cousin or your neighbor. Ask somebody, get second opinions, take a look at these things, get somebody get a client, get a partner involved, but always like have multiple rounds of opinion on people. Always a fan of doing more interviews rather than less. So, we have some important roles that we meet with 5 different people, 3 different internal meetings each, plus without the hire in the room we meet, right? So we might be literally working off of 20, 30 meetings to make a single hire. But that's how we make sure that we get the right hire every time. And then that one hire immediately pays for themselves and all of that time and whatnot that we invested in finding them because they were the right person and they're incredibly capable. And that always unlocks sort of an exponential growth curve in our business. And then the other side of that, the tech side, there's a matrix that I like to use. And for people that don't know what a matrix is, it's essentially just like an X and Y axis that you'd see in school. If you did statistics or algebra or any of that, you'd see the XY axis. And your horizontal axis is the human benefit. And so all the way on the left would be low to no human benefit. And then all the way on the right would be high human benefit. And this is measuring basically an activity or a project or an action, right? So maybe it's writing content, right? We want to write an article. I would put that probably somewhere on the higher side of human benefit, right? Having a human involved in that writing process generally is going to create a better product, right? So that would be something that's higher on the human benefit axis. And then the other axis, the vertical axis, is human cost, right? So how expensive is it for us to use a human versus using tech, right? So if the human cost is high and the human benefit is low, you pretty much always go to tech, right? It's going to be expensive for us to have a person do this. And the fact that it's a person has little to no value, then you would go with tech, always solve that problem with tech. But if you're looking at the other side and you say the cost for a human to be involved is low, but the benefit for a human to be involved is high, you would always go human. And then the other two categories is always somewhere in between. And you kind of have to make that gut decision sometimes. But I always think of like thinking of it through that model and plotting things out that way makes it much easier to determine, when you can solve your problems with humans versus when you can solve your problems with tech, and do it in a way that's conscious of the quality that you're putting out to make sure that it's consistent with what you've delivered up to that point and what you kind of hold as, your values, right? Like what do you hold yourself to as a standard?
Man, I couldn't agree more with your perspective on technology. I was telling you before we started recording, I just spoke at an event in New Orleans targeting digital marketing, marketers for major AV manufacturers and so on. And the entire premise of my talk was that we need to look at AI not as a replacement technology, but as an augmentation and a partnership technology, and use it to handle the routine stuff so that we free up our time and our people's time to focus on more strategic, valuable work. So love that sentiment. And the point about having the right people, that was Dan Sullivan. Uh,
Yep.
Seminal work. We'll
Yeah.
put a link to that in the show notes. It's terrific. And I love that reference because you're the first one to come on the show to talk about that book and framework specifically. We've talked a lot on this show about the EOS framework for business models, which I think mirrors that extensively. In fact, there's an entire exercise inside of EOS where you identify all the people in your organization not by name, but by role. And then you start to plug in the holes and make sure you've got the right people in the right seats in the organization, and that takes a lot of the ego out of it. Maybe you've got to move somebody to a different role. Maybe they're just not a good fit anymore. You need to hire, and it certainly identifies the gap in your current employment. Okay, you know what? We've got a great visionary leader who's running this agency and he's got terrific ideas, but there's nobody to stop that person when he's got a new idea. Maybe we need to put somebody in that implementer role who can say no once in a while and control that person. So love those points. Folks, we're talking with Haydn Fleming about scaling your agency. And in a moment, we're going to talk about tools to use and mistakes to avoid. But before we do, let's make sure you've got the time available to actually improve.
When I take a look at the biggest core benefit for Agorapulse, I have to look at two sides of the equation. I have to look at what it does for us as far as managing our community and all of the conversation management tools, which I appreciate so much. But from a far more pragmatic point of view, it saves us money. It saves us a lot of money because of the productivity, the features that are built in with how it manages those conversations. We don't waste time. We're efficient.
Agorapulse allows me to get through all my messages and my replies really quickly. That's probably the number one reason for me wanting to use the tool. It saves so much time.
A big draw for me with Agorapulse was the ability to manage my YouTube comments. That is a huge feature for me, and here's why. Because up until then, I basically would have to go into my social media manager system to do everything there, and then I'd have to log out, go back into YouTube, and do the same thing there. Now, when you are managing multiple clients, this becomes a huge waste of time, right? And what we want to do is streamline that efficiency. So we can log into one website now. We can manage all of our major social profiles there, and we're able to serve our clients with more clarity and purpose.
They worked with us, they helped train us on how to get everything up and going, and we were able to cancel out all the other tools that we didn't need anymore. So it saved us a lot of time and a lot of headache for my team members, as they're, now they only have one tool that they can maximize their clients in.
So Hayden, you talked a moment ago about identifying those aspects of work that we should be leaning into technology versus human. How do you balance automation, systemization, while maintaining that human touch that a lot of clients expect?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, my matrix approach sort of helps me to avoid it up front, right? So how do I first identify, is this a task or deliverable or project or whatever the case may be that I think would be severely negatively impacted by using tech, so you can make that judgment early. So the common stuff is agencies, freelancers, internal team, marketers at companies, et cetera, have like flocked to ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, et cetera, all these large language models. And there's a lot of content, just vomit being written by large language models. And I think that is largely a mistake. And, that's a good example of where, sort of the brand direction of a company, the unique tone of voice, the heart of the brand, the essence of the brand, et cetera, is largely translated through written word, and outside of obviously visuals and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, a lot of that stuff originates in written form, right? We have briefs, we have documents, we have internal letters to staff, et cetera. And so much of this stuff is being, I think, oversimplified into large language models. And like, that's an example of an area where I think marketing is being somewhat watered down by the use of these large language models for, just instant one-click drafting. I'm not going to think about, my entire social media calendar. I'm not going to think about my entire blog calendar for the year. I'm just going to hit 5 buttons and like post whatever it gives me. And that, I think, is an example where like we're completely losing human touch. Yet for whatever reason, that's sort of like when people think about AI or they start using AI for the first time, that's the default. That's what like step one is for a lot of people, is like, great, let me go just hand my entire job off to this tool. And so, I look at that as sort of a plague on our industry, and how do we combat that in a way that it, doesn't necessarily negate the value or effectiveness of these tools, but uses it in a way that's healthy, that uses it in a way that doesn't diminish what a brand could be capable of, and certainly doesn't diminish what a brand's perspective is from the uh, the perspective of the public, right? The customer, the prospects, et cetera. We don't want them to be looking at a brand with disgust or disdain or resentment because of their use of various pieces of tech. So it's important that tech is um, additive in a way that does not detract from output volume or quality. And so what I find most of the time tools to be very great at is efficiency, speed, and rate of output, as well as maybe QA, but not necessarily the creation of quality or the creation of unique value. Most of what I find, our best work comes out of is, one or two creative minds sitting down, laser focused for hours on end to create something unique and interesting and compelling. And then tools and tech and AI and other staff and all of these things kind of come together to then shape that creative into reality rather than um, using it as like the one click button to do the entire process, right? There still has to be these sort of key checkpoints where humans are the most important aspect in the um, supply chain of marketing creation, both strategically as well as quantitatively from a like distributable perspective. There should never be anything published anywhere that hasn't been heavily ideated and critiqued by a human. I think the idea of letting AI or any tool in general run the show 100% is incredibly flawed. We're on this early stage with agents, which is an incredibly interesting and deep topic. The idea of AI agents. It's some of the most innovative tech that we've had since the birth of the internet. But I still think that it's going to be mostly used incorrectly in the beginning. I think there's going to be a lot of people that are phoning in their job, um, collecting the paycheck, and then letting an AI agent do the work. And what companies, people, brands, et cetera, are going to continue to experience is further watering down of just the internet as a whole, right? Like everything that we engage with digitally is getting more and more watered down as these tools become more and more accessible and prevalent and so on. And so I see, um, just the macro trend, big picture trend already shaping, but then also in the future, it's going to, I think, only get more and more important. But this trend towards verifiable authenticity and genuineness, and the desire for a lack of professionalism or a lack of polish, right? So how do we create things and experiences that the person in the perceiving chair, the person watching on their phone or watching on their computer or sitting in a theater or whatever the case may be, how do we make sure that we create an experience that they can know and trust is genuine and authentic and not pre-scripted by an AI, filmed by an AI, post-produced by an AI, distributed by an AI, right? Like how do we keep the humans in human interaction? How do we keep social in social, right? So that's, I mean, one of, if not the most important topic when it comes to mass media communications right now is how do we sort of prevent, or maybe not prevent, but take advantage of this trend in the watering down of what we all know and mostly love about the internet today.
Yeah, you're so right. We're recording this on May 20th. Google is just announcing and rolling out Gemini baked into Chrome, and specifically
Mhm.
Gemini agentic capabilities. So very soon, anyone with a Chrome browser will be able to ask Gemini to do anything that it could do using an internet browser. Pretty wild and exciting, and also terrifying and concerning when it comes to the kinds of topics that we're talking about. So that's like, customer facing content. What about your own internal automation and processes? Are there any tools that you're using there to help yourself out?
Yeah, absolutely. I think every tool we use has some form of automating this, automating that, helping us here, helping us there, and there's a lot of little things like that I think, we've learned to take for granted at this point, like, making a file and it auto generates a name for that file and a description for it. And,
Wow.
you make a Loom video and it automatically copies the link to your clipboard, so you don't even have to hit Command C, Command V. There's things like that that are happening in every tool we use on a daily basis. There's these little updates all the time, and it's created a ridiculous amount of efficiencies, where even just 1 second, 2 second, 5 seconds of time saved here and there throughout the day, constantly across teams. I mean, it's incredible the amount of shifts in efficiency. But if we're looking at kind of big picture stuff, what are some tools that I think are maybe moving the needle more so than others, right? Not just the little things that save a second here or there, but some that are doing things that are really, really interesting. There's two for me that come to mind right away. One of them is Icon, which is a fairly new, I think it's less than 8 months old or something along the lines of that. It's icon.me. So if you're looking at a browser, go type in icon.me. And it's a ad platform, basically. It helps you create ads. And it uses, there's a lot of things that it does, but it essentially is a combination of 7 or 8 different really popular ad tools like Motion, CapCut, Facebook ad library, ad spy for competitor analysis, et cetera. So there's like a lot of these tools that have been vastly regarded as the go-to for a long time. And this company essentially made a version of all these tools, put them into one suite, and then tied them all together with AI, where all these different tools can communicate really effectively together. Everything that you do or create learns off of itself, right? So, for example, we'll go into a client account, identify 3 or 4 key competitors in Meta. It will automatically analyze all of those creatives that those companies are running, identify any trends, but whether that's from angles or do they feature promos or not, do they feature humans or not, are they graphic design or are they real, are they videos or images, right? It analyzes all these data points and then basically comes back and it says, okay, here's the 3 ad formats that have the highest performance across this competitor set over this period of time. We should test creating an ad in a similar format. um, and then it has large language model baked into it, right? So you can have a conversation with its language model that knows the client, analyzes the client, knows the competitor data, helps you work your way through creating ad scripts. Then it will automatically generate lots of variations from a real footage library. So you upload, here's 300 videos that we have in stock of content that we filmed for this client or whatever it may be. It'll automatically browse all of that and pull 2 seconds from this video, 5 seconds from that, 4 seconds from this, stitch them together, and it'll form a whole ad. And then it has a built-in editor that you can, like CapCut, if you're familiar with CapCut, it's very easy drag drop editor. It does all this in one synchronized workflow. Whereas this used to be 5, 6, 7 different tools that you had to go log in, download this report, do some analysis. Okay, I figured out what this is. Now I'm going to go over here. It used to be a very, very tasking process, and now this is something that we can test and create 50 variations of a new ad idea with data behind why we made the decisions we made and sort of what style it is and what scripting it is and all of that. In an afternoon, whereas that used to take multiple weeks to produce. So I think that tool in particular is really, really compelling. And the other one is a platform called N8N, which was somewhat on the forefront of the AI agent stuff. And I mean, I still would say it is, but it was one of the first tools that allowed you to work across, a bunch of different tech platforms and create your own agent and teach it how to do tasks of whatever capacity, right? This is growing really quickly. So we'll see where it goes with ChatGPT's own operator agent, where Gemini goes with their agent, to where, maybe this won't be the tool anymore in a few months. But up to this point, we found it incredibly useful, for being able to give it essentially a job description, like this is who you are and what you do and what you're responsible for, and then sending it in a direction and it coming back with completed work, and it being able to browse the internet, access, um, you know, different language models, being able to access research databases, spreadsheets, client documents, the website, et cetera, like being able to access all this information, and use it sort of as a map to execute its tasks, it's incredibly useful. And it honestly has infinite applications that I think we're still barely scratching the surface of. But those two tools, I would say, above all, have unlocked significant area for efficiency that I think any agency would be able to take advantage of.
Yeah, those sound fascinating. So the first tool was icon.me. .me,
Hmm.
right? What was the second one? The URL?
In 8n, yeah. So it's letter in, number eight, letter in.com. Yeah.
Got it.
It's like Zapier. So if you're familiar with Zapier, it's like that, but it's a little bit like further down the food chain in terms of AI. I mean, they've just taken the Zapier concept and integrated AI at a ridiculously good and in-depth level, but it's still incredibly drag and drop. I would recommend having some solid understanding of how AI works and having some solid technical skills to be able to read this stuff and interact with it well. But I guarantee you it's worth the 20 hours of education that it would take to be able to build systems. So for example, I'll give you an example of a process that we have. I have an agent for is research for SEO. Obviously there's a dozen different SEO tools that you can use for research. You could run audits on a website. We've got a ton of database of just backlogged information from clients in the past. Basically, I have an agent that will read everything in a Google Drive that we have about a client. It'll read every brief, everything that's ever been published. It'll read every report that's ever been generated, et cetera. So it knows this client better than I do, probably. It knows every punctuation point and number and stat and everything. And it takes all of that. It can also browse the internet and use tools like SEMrush and Ahrefs to get keyword data and then all of that sort of information. It can also do a Google search and look at competitors that are ranking for various keywords that we might target and read every single page on there and diagnose, what are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? Do they use certain scripts or not use certain scripts, et cetera? And then I have sort of my personal concoction of what I look for when it comes to good SEO content. And so I have this, 80-point checklist of like, here's all the things that I want to go through. And previously, I had a member of my staff that would always go through this 80-point checklist and they would have to go do Google search and look at the competitors and they'd have to go in the database and look at the past data. But now I can have an AI agent do all of it in 30 seconds and then create a Google Doc that is an in-depth, like very well put together analysis and research of exactly what should be done to create a stunning page. And then it sends it to me in Slack. I get a little notification in Slack and it says, here's the link, go click it. And it's done. I can share it. I can do whatever I want with it. And that becomes the basis that then humans can go take this analytical research and turn it into something awesome for a client that customers love, prospects love, and generates performance. And, something like that would take 10 hours easily for a good researcher to put that level of detail in. And I can have it done in 30 seconds. And I can do it a dozen, I could do it 100 times a day. I could do it over and over and over again. So yeah, it's things like that are just like one example. It's the tip of the iceberg of what we're going to be able to do with agents and all these other things.
Fascinating. You've covered a lot. I mean, from early on mistakes of just saying yes to everything and not having processes in place, um, not having the right balance between technology and automation and keeping our human staff involved. And even what we were just talking about a moment ago, I think a potential mistake a lot of agency owners can make is getting too engrossed in these tools and starting to chase all the shiny objects. So there are now thousands of AI-powered tools out there,
Hmm.
and you can easily wait an entire year to try to deal with them all. What do you think the biggest mistake, in your opinion, is when you see agencies that are trying to scale and fix all these processes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a two steps forward, 10 steps back type of problem, where, you know, agency owners, leaders, et cetera, are really afraid to let go of things, let go of processes. They're afraid to be too malleable. They want to follow, the things they hear on podcasts like this, and they want to follow the YouTubers and all this stuff. And to a degree, that all makes sense. But I think every agency is so different, and every team is different. Every client is different, and so I think you have to have your core kind of headspace in the right direction. You have to understand the fundamentals, but you can't necessarily go so far as to follow the like step 1 through 10 process that somebody's perfectly outlined and how to scale to 100K a month or like whatever it is, right? I think that stuff is guaranteeing that you're building somebody else's business and you're not building your own. And they don't have your business; they have their business. So just because it worked for them doesn't mean it's going to work for you. What's worked for me, if I went into the super specific details, it might work for some people, but it also might not work for everybody because you have your own business, you have your own problems, you have your own pricing, you have your own audience, you have everything's different. So I think like having the right mindset of knowing it's going to be hard, knowing that you need people and you need good people, the right people, understanding the difference between when you need tech and when you need people, um, being able to lose a little bit in the short term to gain a lot in the long term is a really big thing, and I think um, that's often really hard. I give you the example of sales. I think I see this happen the most with sales. Often in the early stages, agency founders and owners and operators, et cetera, are also the ones that are doing all of the sales because that's how it started. That's how it still is. It's one of the hardest departments to let go, I've found, is because they're so afraid of like, if I give sales off to somebody else and they don't do a good job, then we're going to go broke and like, my life's going to end and everything's going to be terrible. And I think, you have to kind of get out of that mindset of not being able to let go of things. Um, you need to set yourself up in a position by any means to be able to rest on your own product. Well, what I mean by that is your your customers should pay for your business, and if you stop doing everything and you like spent a month in Cabo, your business would not blow up, right? Um, and that's I don't you don't have to be making, $1 million a year. You don't have to make, you know, $1 million every 5 years. Like you can have a fairly small agency and still get to that. Um, so it's not so much about like, well, I'll rest when I get to this size, or I'll do that when I get here, or I'm too small for that, or anything like that. You need to get as close to that as you possibly can first. And then once you're there, you can then start to give up things and not have so much fear around it, right? Because when you're like a hungry dog that needs a bone, it's hard to give things up. But when you're satisfied and you're not living in fear and you're not stressed and you're not, spread thin, then it's easy to say, okay, like I spend 20 hours a week doing this thing, and now I'm going to spend two. I'm going to give the other 18 hours to somebody else, and let's see what happens. And if it goes terribly wrong, that's okay. And you have that mindset going into it, that bad things are going to happen because you only need it to work once. As soon as that works, you just earned 18 hours of your work week back, and you can now do exponentially more while also having that person doing the thing that you needed them to do really successfully. Um, and then you just do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again, and so you slowly just cut pieces of your work off. But you can't do that if you're spread too thin, and you can't do that if you're terrified of what's going to happen or terrified of your bills or anything of that nature, right? So you have to be in a personal point of security. You have to be emotionally secure and comfortable with the fact that it's probably going to be hard and it's probably going to be painful, and just be open to learn. Like, you don't have it figured out. I don't have it figured out. Like, people who make $1 billion a year don't have it figured out. Like, we're all just still figuring this stuff out, and you have to learn like what's going to work for you and what's not going to work for you. So just be willing to be in a little bit of pain, get yourself in the best possible position so that pain is survivable. It's not going to put you in a bad spot. And be okay with, I'm going to take 2 steps back, but because I do that now, in 3 months, I'm going to be 10 steps ahead. Rather than most agency people, owners, et cetera, do the opposite, which is they take, 2 steps back and then they micromanage this new person and they end up spending that full 18 hours just micromanaging anyways. So then why were they even here in the first place? And so then they let the person go because they didn't really do very good, or they weren't operating independently. And so now you're back doing it yourself. It's a they get on the treadmill and jump off. They get on the treadmill and they jump off. And sometimes you just have to jump on there and be willing to, work it out, wait it out, give people room, give people breathing ability, so that you can get to ultimately where you're trying to go.
So I think what I heard you say, just to kind of summarize all of that, was that the biggest mistake agency owners are making is that they're not subscribed to this
Exactly. You heard me exactly right. Yeah.
podcast.
TLDR.
TLDR. No, this has been fantastic. Seriously, and this has been really insightful. I appreciate this, and I know folks are going to want to ask you follow-up questions because I know we're just touching the surface in a lot of these areas. So if they want to reach out, where can they connect with you best?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is the absolute best place. Thankfully, I've got a unique enough name. My first name is spelled Haydn. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Haydn Fleming, easy to find. Or you could just Google me if you forget that. You can find me in a lot of ways. But LinkedIn is the best place. I monitor that every day. I post content on there. I can chat there. It's great. So I'd love to meet anybody and everybody and have follow up conversations.
Fantastic. We will, of course, have all those links in the show notes below, along with Dan Sullivan's book, the tools Hayden mentioned, and everything else. So thank you so much, Hayden. Thank you, all of you, for listening. That's all the time we've got for today. Don't forget to find the Social Pulse Podcast Agency Edition on Apple. Drop me a review. Let me know what you thought about this episode, what kinds of topics you'd like to see us cover in future episodes. I'll read every single comment. Thanks so much, everyone. Till next time.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Social Pulse Podcast Agency Edition, hosted by Mike Alton and powered by AgoraPulse, the #1 rated social media management solution, which you can learn more about at agorapulse.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player and be sure to leave us a review. Your feedback is important to us.